Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and this week, in lieu of the Not So Serious Keto video podcast, I will be sharing with you part one of my interview with Chef Scott Guerin of Modernist Pantry. Now, this interview wound up running a little bit over an hour long, so what I'm going to do is split it into 3 separate videos, which I will publish every other week. In part 1, we talk about our individual approaches to how we create new recipes. We talk about what it's like experimenting with new ingredients and how we handle that. And then we spend a significant portion of this podcast talking about hydrocolloids. Now, hydrocolloids are things like thickeners and emulsifiers. And I think there are some of these that have the potential to be an absolute game changer in the keto world. And we spend a lot of time talking about that. So that's a lot of fun. I guess that's it for an intro. Let's kick off the interview. So welcome, my very special guest. I'm just thrilled to have you here, Scott. Scott Guerin, Chef Scott Guerin from Modernist Pantry. Welcome, Scott. Can you tell my viewers what your title is and what all that entails?
Sure. So I have a number of different titles. I kind of go, research development chef. I'm a certified executive chef. If you ever email me, my email says supreme spellbinder of sustenance. It can be anything. It's really, I just deal with the food and creating the food that you see hopefully on our YouTube channel, if you ever have gone there, Modernist Pantry on YouTube.
I do on a regular basis.
Oh, great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So everything that's there is created by me, and that's basically all I do is I work with these really hard to find ingredients and bring them to hopefully the masses so people can use them and understand them without having to have too much nerves and worry about them.
So as you're developing recipes, do you have a staff so that, if you've got a dozen different ideas on different ratios or times and temperatures or things like that, you can kind of divvy it up and parse it out to your minions?
Nope, it's just me. It's just me. I deal with. We have like a photographer who's freelance, and he's a great guy, great chef too. He was a chef at a really amazing restaurant up here in Maine. 4-star, 5-diamond establishment. So he's amazing, and he would help me out a little bit, but his own freelance business really took off. So it's really just been me for the last year. Just literally everything that you see on the website and whatnot is all tested by me. So lots of small batches, lots of different ratios, lots of mistakes, more mistakes than success, but the success is what makes it worth it,
So I'd like to try and make this as conversational as possible, kind of, batting back and forth questions and answers. But I'd like to follow up on that for just 1 second and then, give you a chance to ask something.
Sure.
But I find as I'm working on a recipe, the worst place to be is 95% of the way there. You're like, oh, I almost got this. I'm one trial away. If this next trial goes right, I'm publishing this recipe. And it's never the next one that gets you there. Do you find sort of a similar thing?
Yeah, I've tested so many recipes at this point. So a lot of the times I have ratios down in my head that are pretty good, and I understand. I have good notes and a great memory. Thankfully, I was blessed with that to be able to remember, okay, I know around this percentage I'm going to get this result. And a lot of cooking is like that too. Okay, if I add these 2 ingredients, I'm going to get this flavor. Whereas if I add these 2, functional ingredients, I'm going to get this texture. And that's kind of where I am. So a lot at the beginning, yes, I would have a lot of, I don't know where to go. I am stuck, literally hitting a wall to the point where I'm sitting in bed at night thinking what gives me that texture I'm looking for? What's giving me that function I'm looking for? And over time, thankfully, it's got a little bit easier. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a little bit easier now okay, I know what could work here, and I know almost the perfect ratio. And a little back and forth, maybe this is a bit too much, maybe this is a little too slick on the palate, maybe it's, needs maybe it just needs a completely different product. But I can think of that product, and that's really helping me is, just the ability to work with it so often and literally learn these ingredients front to back.
Does it ever get overwhelming, almost like the paradox of choice with all of the ingredients you have at your disposal there?
Initially, yeah, there's so many, but then you break them up into groups. It's okay. What is this gel? What does it do? How is it different? Okay, this one, it goes over here, and I use that if I only need to. And then you find like these perfect ingredients that will work for what you want it to work for. Obviously, there's ones that work better for a multitude of things, whereas there's ingredients that have very specific uses. You know, they're almost like secret agents. You know, you only pull them out when things are completely screwed up. So, you know, you definitely find your main uses, and then you have your backups and things like that. Yeah, it definitely was weird because I taught in Le Cordon Bleu, and I taught contemporary cuisine, so I knew these ingredients, but I didn't know these ingredients. You know, I knew the basis of them, but still you would try to make spherification and screw it up, and it would be stressful. But now I know spherification front to back, and I can look at it. And even when people call me, because I take care of all the customer service for all of the ingredient questions, and it's like, okay, are your spheres, you know, dissipating immediately when you put them in the liquid? You need to check your acid in there, and it's that kind of stuff. It's all my time's devoted to it, so I'm just constantly working with it, and it's much better now than it was, and that's a big change. And so, like, on your scale, obviously you have a certain amount of ingredients. Like, do you find ones that you like, or are you constantly trying constant new ones to see if there's something, you know, better out there for you?
So, yeah, I love the experimental and sort of chemical reaction aspects of cooking. And I don't know if watching WTF, your show,
Yep.
We Transform Food, for those who haven't watched it. And if you haven't watched it, you should be watching it.
Thank you.
But
I appreciate it.
Like I said, I think I shouldn't watch it because I get out there and I watch. I'm like, ooh, I've never heard of this before. I got to order some of that. Now, how do I use it? You did the Terra gum and the ice cream, and I had recently purchased a Ninja Creamy. Mm-hmm. And I've been making ice cream with a keto product, a meal replacement product called Keto Chow, just because it's insanely easy to make ice cream with this stuff. Yeah. And the problem was I was getting the ice crystals in it.
Yeah.
And rather serendipitously, right around that same time, you and Janie did the video on Terra gum. So I ordered up that, I got it, and used it in a video, and then I think caused you guys to sell out of it.
Yeah.
But I'm always on the lookout for something new. I don't know if there's any specific ingredient that I find myself going to on a regular basis. I mean, there's some, and I'm sure you have this as well, certain like spices especially that I find are kind of like my trick spice, things that people aren't familiar with and they can't quite figure out what they're tasting. Things like fennel pollen. I think that's an amazing ingredient. It imparts that hint of fennel, but not so much that people understand really what they're tasting. I like ingredients like that where you're almost creating a subliminal flavor sense for people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think like one thing that we should kind of talk about, because we're talking really broad about it, but it's when we start testing, even you or I, is, this may be new for people, and like, where do you start? So where would you start? If you had a recipe, like, where is your baseline? Like, where do you start?
So are you talking about with recipes or in general and keto-fying them, or just with using a new ingredient?
You wanted to make something, because this is kind of, I just touched my mic, so if it got really loud, sorry, people. So I just made I tried really hard, a keto pizza crust, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't know where to start, and I don't like to personally look for a recipe to just completely take and then switch up. Not all the time, but if I looked at that and I said, okay, I've made a keto bread and I've made a chaffle, and it's like, where can I find a happy medium to get a pizza crust? So we just did it, and it took quite a few tests, but I think I was able to get down, like a really nice pizza, because I wanted to have like an elevated crust and extremely crispy bottom. And I think I was able to get there really well, almost with like an amalgam of these two recipes. Now, when I started, it was like, let me just see how a chaffle is if I spread it out super thin. Okay, that didn't work. Let me see how my bread is if I spread it super thin, or then I try a Sicilian, and then I start adding and putting ingredients in. And, okay, no, not that one. Take it out, make another batch, put this ingredient in. Oh, that works for XYZ. Like, is that where you start, or?
So, I'm going to kind of answer both the where's the recipe start, and then how do I test ingredients in one long answer. But I usually start. There's always, in my opinion, some form of inspiration, whether that's a pre-existing recipe from my large collection of cookbooks, or I watch an episode of Milk Street, or America's Test Kitchen. Those are like the only two TV shows I watch. Or I see, you using an ingredient, and that's the inspiration for me. Or I wake up, 2 a.m. This happens almost every night. Between 2 and 4, I wake up and my mind is just racing. And then I grab my phone and I'm like, okay, I got to remember this idea. So that's sort of where it starts. Like you, I don't want to take somebody else's recipe generally and just be like, oh, I'm going to tweak one ingredient. I want to do something more than that. And that's why, to a large extent, I don't watch other keto YouTubers. Just because, unless it's something that's just totally out of my wheelhouse, like keto baking is just tough. And we'll probably loop back to that conversation later. But then when it comes to actually,
unto itself,
when you start doing experiments, I've got a background in continuous improvement and lean and quality. And as a result, I get into this mindset that what I'm doing when I'm making these recipes is sort of like destructive product testing. You realize that there's a significant chance that you're going to be throwing away whatever you make. And as a result, you want to make small batches. So, I always try and minimize my batch size. Then you got to consider, well, wait a second. Once I then scale this up, does that change things? Does that become another variable in this equation that's going to change the cooking, because it takes longer to come up to temp or something like that? But if I'm working with an entirely new ingredient, and I've been playing around with a lot of hydrocolloids and thickeners, to me, I'm going to start just see what happens when I mix it with water, because that's my least expensive ingredient.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that can lend its own issues, just because how are you mixing it? Are you just like whisking it in, or are you using a blender or an immersion blender?
Well, that's one of the things that then I keep a spreadsheet of, like how much shear does this require? Yeah. Does it require heat? Does it break back down when it's chilled and things like that? I mean, this is one of the big challenges, I think.
So one question. You're recording all that yourself? You haven't looked? Because there's tons of information.
I get out onto your site. I get out onto Chef Steps, and I'll look up ratios. But even then, a lot of the ratios, you get a wide swath.
Yes.
And some sites are a lot more forthcoming in the information they provide for free. Others, you got to pay for. So I get what I can get.
Yeah. So one of the things I can suggest with that is, if you are going to be, just mixing it with water, I would definitely suggest dry mixing it with another, inexpensive powdered ingredient. Usually it's sugar, but I know you can't be doing that. But it's just the ability, so like you're not getting those clumps, you're getting the full effect of what it is. And even
for like xanthan gum, for example, I always dry mix first, just to improve the dispersion.
Yeah. Perfected xanthan gum works a lot better than regular xanthan gum, a product that we have, just because it's partially hydrated, which means it's already been hydrated once, so the second time is going to be just as easy.
The perfected stuff is great when you're doing a pan sauce that you want to keep chunks of stuff in there. You don't want to, completely puree whatever vegetables or aromatics that are in there. I like that perfected xanthan gum.
Perfected xanthan gum, perfected guar. We have a few other ingredients that I'm really into. One called 210S. I mean, it's not the most appealing name. It's basically 210S. and it is xanthan gum, like a combination of xanthan gum and acacia gum, which acacia gum has, it mixes in very easily, and it has good, mild thickening properties. But then the xanthan gum's such a small amount that when they're added together, they become almost this like super emulsifier. And that is, I mean, if you watch my videos, I use it all the time because it just works. It works great for dilution. It works just for so many different things. And that's one that I'm like, every time I use it, I'm impressed by it.
And that was called 210S, as I write that down?
Yeah, 210S. Yeah. So I was able to make like a hollandaise sauce that I didn't have, I used egg yolk powder. I basically just made it like a mayonnaise, and then I was able to heat it up to order. So I'm not having to waste a ton of hollandaise sauce, because that's something, people end up wasting tons and tons and tons of hollandaise sauce just because they make it, and then I gotta throw it away because there's nothing you can do with it. You cannot bring it back to life, but with the 210S, I can freeze it and bring it back to life. So yeah.
Well, keto folks are willing to eat hollandaise like soup, so not a problem there.
And one great thing is that if you mix it in, so there are French recipes where hollandaise then gets mixed into a soup recipe or anything. This completely, works with any dilution, so it will keep that emulsion, while it's diluted into stuff. So you're not going to get that oil slick. You're going to get a little bit of that, richness from it. It's an amazing ingredient. I mean, I could talk all day about it.
Do you have a video on it?
I have
on the hollandaise
videos on it. Yeah, I think it's called like Make Ahead Hollandaise or No Break Hollandaise or something like that.
I may have that printed out and up in my kitchen right at the moment.
Yeah,
now that you tell me the name.
I also did a butter sauce with it. It's got to be fat and water. It can be used in things like ice cream as well, just because it has the xanthan in there and the acacia gum, or just in regular, any emulsion that you're trying to make. I would suggest using that. It's a great thing.
In the video description for this, I will link both to your channel as well as that, or any other recipes that we wind up talking about specifically. But this kind of leads me to another question that I'm really curious about, because I'm excited about it. I've been doing a little bit of work with it, is hydrocolloids. Mm-hmm. So how would you, to the uninitiated, explain what a hydrocolloid is and why you would use it?
Sure, I might explain it as functional ingredient, just because that may be a little bit easier to understand. And we actually just did a video on it. It's not out yet. It'll probably be out in 2 months or so. But we just did it, and functional ingredient is an ingredient that performs something within the recipe. Now, if you have a recipe and it calls for cinnamon, and you don't put cinnamon, the recipe will work, but it won't taste like cinnamon. With a functional ingredient, if you have a recipe and it calls for this functional ingredient and you don't put it in there, it won't work because it performs
like a leavening agent, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be a functional ingredient.
That's the next part of it, is you say, and some of these ingredients sound, scary. They sound different. They sound like something that you wouldn't normally get. But so does sodium bicarbonate, until you find out that it's baking soda and you've been using it for, 40 years. So, or even more, depending on, when you started using it. So it's one of those things is, once you understand them, they're not intimidating at all. They just happen to have intimidating names. And, we take things and we change up the names every once in a while to just make them a little bit more understandable. And all of them are things that you've probably eaten before. There are, a lot of stuff in any food, and even a lot of bakeries are starting to use things like lecithin and whatnot, which is a great one to use as well, because that is basically fat-based. So, all of our videos are not keto. So we have some that are keto, and obviously recipes that are just like mistaking, to be keto. So these ingredients, you can use them in keto because a lot of them are just either fiber, or they are, some of them are completely made of fat, monodiglycerides, or lecithin, or they're just, use them in such small quantities that they're almost negligible,
So if you had one hydrocolloid that you could use? Is there one that you find is more of a jack of all trades than others, that works as a thickener, an emulsifier, etc.?
Yeah, it would have to go like category by category, right? So a thickener, yes, I would probably go with something like either a 210S if you're only looking for mild, thickening properties, or a tarragon. That's great. But if you're just going to use it for general purposes, maybe a perfected guar, just so you get a little less of that slick mouthfeel, right? I know you said one, but I gave you three. And then for a gelling agent, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult, because what are you trying to gel, right? There's so many textures of gel. And if you're not using gelatin, I would suggest we have what's known as vegan gelatin. Vegan gelatin is like a carrageenan mixture, and it gives this extremely bouncy at high ratios, but also as you cut into it, it makes like a very smooth texture, and that's really wonderful. It's almost creamy, the texture that is made. So I've made a vegan. We do a ton of vegan or plant-based recipes, and that made like an amazing vegan flan that just like out of this world, and you just wouldn't even know because it's soy, and then you put the vanilla and the sweetener in it, and you get this really great, amazing vegan flan that's just basically soy and vegan gelatin. So that's one that I really like to go to, just because it works really well, and the texture. That's one thing that the texture has to be good. It can't be that slimy or whatnot. And also, the lower the ratio, the better. Just get it there, and you're going to get less of any texture that's going to be off-putting,
So as I stated during the video, I will provide a link down in the description below to Modernist Pantry, along with a coupon code that can be used on anything in their thickeners category. In terms of 210S, it's a great product, but if you already have xanthan gum or perfected xanthan gum, all you need to make your own 210S is acacia gum. And I don't know if this is the right ratio or not, but I just mixed it 1-to-1. It is an incredible thickener. So, like I said, if you already have xanthan gum, just get the acacia gum. But I think that is going to be it for this little podcasty interview thing. Remember, part 2 is going to come in 2 weeks. So, next week, back to the regular podcast. Thanks for watching or listening.